I'll never forget the morning Karen's voice sliced through the still air like a hot knife through butter grating, entitled and dripping in that nauseating hint of cheap perfume. That rustic monstrosity has to go. You have 30 days to remove it or the fines will be biblical. I didn't even have to turn around. I knew it was her, the president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. She had that walk, the one that screams authority, but in the way a cornered badger demands space. I didn't need to face her yet. I kept my eyes trained on the horizon, my hand resting on the cool steel of the old windmill my grandfather had built 70 years ago. The blades creaked with a rhythm I'd known all my life, the kind of sound that felt like home. And in the background, though Karen didn't realize it, that same windmill had been quietly keeping her house watered for years. Her morning shower, my windmill. The sprinkler system on her lawn, also my windmill. I was the quiet engine behind her suburban fantasy, and she didn't even know it. Finally, I turned to face her. Karen was standing there like she'd just stepped out of a bad reality show, decked out in a garish pink tracksuit that strained at the seams. Her arms were crossed, a theatrical scowl on her face. Beside her were her two lackeys, Barb and Janice, those loyal sycophants who would nod at whatever nonsense she spouted. For a moment, I just studied her. I dealt with her type before in far worse places than this neat little cul de sac. Petty tyrants who mistake a small sliver of power for absolute dominion. They thrive on rules, not because they're about order, but because they love the control they get from enforcing them. I'm no stranger to authority. I spent 20 years as an officer in the Army Corps of Engineers building things that lasted. So yeah, I understand structure regulations and chain of command, but I also know the difference between leadership and bullying. This, my friends, was the latter. And she was about to learn just how deeply she'd overstepped. I could have told Karen right then and there about the legacy of my family's land, the forgotten history of the community's water supply, the decades-old contract that made my windmill the beating heart of Oak Ridge Estates. I could have laid it all out for her, but I didn't. She wasn't ready to hear it. No. Instead, I made a choice, a quiet choice, a dangerous one. I chose compliance, malicious compliance. You want the windmill gone? Fine. You'll get exactly what you want. But trust me, Karen, you have no idea what you're asking for. The storm won't be in the sky. It'll be right here at your doorstep in your pristine little neighborhood that you've carefully curated one fine at a time. I was about to make her the center of that storm. Now I'm sure you're wondering what happens next. But before I tell you, hit that subscribe button. This is about to get real interesting. And don't forget to drop a comment below. I want to know if you've ever had a run-in with your own HOA tyrant. You're not alone. So there we were. Karen's smug smile stretched wide across her face as she listed off all the official consequences she was planning to inflict. Fines, letters, legal action. She was so sure of herself. But I just smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. Biblical, you say, I asked, calm as a Sunday morning. Well, Karen, you might want to start building an ark. Her face twisted. She didn't get it. She sputtered, promised more threats, more legal wrangling. And I just gave her a slow nod, turned my back, and patted the windmill like it was an old friend. Game on, I muttered under my breath. My grandfather, Sergeant Thomas Miller, bought this land back in 1952 after serving 2 tours in Europe and the Pacific. He wasn't a fancy officer, but a tough NCO who could make do with anything. He built the house with his own hands, dug a well, and put up that windmill to pump water. It was his sanctuary. Then, when suburbia started creeping in during the 70s, he sold off most of the land but kept the central 5 acres. When the developer came to build Oak Ridge Estates, they realized that running a new water main all the way out here would be expensive and impractical. So my grandfather struck a deal with the developer. He'd allow the 10 homes on the Cul de Sac access to his well, provided they paid a small annual maintenance fee. And in exchange, he'd never have to deal with HOA rules. The agreement was ironclad. For 30 years, everything worked fine. Until Karen took over. She didn't care about history. She didn't care about the people who had come before her. She saw that windmill, that symbol of my family's legacy, and she decided it was an eyesore. The barn was too red, the fence too rustic, and the windmill too industrial. It didn't fit her perfect little picture of suburban harmony. So after our confrontation, I went to my grandfather's old roll-top desk and pulled out that leather folder he'd left me. The papers inside weren't just old, They were power. The easement agreement was clear. The windmill wasn't a decoration. It was essential shared infrastructure for the entire neighborhood. And Karen, she didn't just have an opinion, she was trying to break a legally binding contract. I spent the rest of the day compiling evidence. I scanned the original documents. I photographed the windmill from every angle. I filmed a video inside the pump house. I had everything I needed. But Karen, she wasn't operating on facts. She was on a crusade. Her ego had taken over and there was no turning back. 3 days after our confrontation, I received her letter in the mail. It was filled with passive-aggressive legalese. She was demanding that I remove the windmill within 30 days. She'd even had the audacity to call it a temporary structure. This after 70 years of standing tall. The audacity was breathtaking. But I didn't get angry. I got calm. I got strategic. I drafted my response carefully, meticulously. I acknowledged her letter, but I corrected her classification of the windmill. I asked for documentation that confirmed the windmill was purely aesthetic and non-functional. Of course, she had no such documents. This wasn't a legal battle, it was a game of wills, and mine would be the last word. I sent the letter by certified mail with return receipt requested. I documented every step, every move. The next week, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting, a public spectacle to rally her troops. It was a setup, an attempt to turn the neighborhood against me, but I wasn't alone anymore. I looked around at the faces in the crowd. Karen was busy stirring the pot, trying to paint me as the bad guy. But then I saw Marcus, the retired Marine, and the Petersons, whose kids had been targeted for a plastic slide. I realized Karen's grip on the neighborhood wasn't as strong as she thought. There were cracks in her perfect little world. When Karen's speech ended, I spoke up calm and deliberate. "Have you reviewed the county property records?" I asked her. "Have you pulled the original plat map and the foundational covenants from 1978? Karen's face went pale. She was cornered. Her ego couldn't save her now. As the meeting broke up, I walked over to Marcus. "You're with me now," I said, and we shook hands. That was the start of our alliance. From that moment on, Karen was no longer in charge. The following weeks were a blur of preparation. I made the call to a crane company. I called in some old friends who now ran a successful contracting business. They laughed when I told them the situation, but they were all in. It wasn't just about winning, it was about making a statement. Then came the day. The D-Day of Karen's downfall. Karen had set up a folding table ready to watch the destruction of my windmill. She had donuts, coffee, and a crowd of sycophants. But as the crane truck rolled up and my friends got to work, she had no idea what was coming. I gave the signal. The crane operator nodded. At 10 a.m., the windmill's connection was cut. Water pressure vanished from every house on the Cul de Sac. The first person noticed was Barb, Karen's loyalist. "My sprinkler's not working," she said, confused. Soon more voices joined in. "My hose just died. My toilet won't flush." Karen's triumphant smile faded, replaced by panic. She tried to blame it on a water main break, but I stood firm. The Oak Ridge Estates Cul de Sac isn't connected to the municipal water system. It never has been. The water you've been using for decades has come from my well. And that windmill you wanted gone, well, you just cut off your own lifeline. The crowd gasped. They were starting to understand. Then I handed out packets, legal documents, maps, correspondence. It all clicked. Karen had been playing them for fools, and now they were angry. The truth was undeniable. But the fun wasn't over. A local news van showed up. A reporter got the whole story on camera. Karen, the HOA president, was exposed for the fraud she was. Her reign crumbled before her very eyes. The next HOA meeting was a public trial. Karen was removed from office, and the board was forced to admit they had acted recklessly. The HOA would pay for a new water connection, but Karen, she was gone. The neighborhood had woken up. As for me, I became the operator of the only water supply in Oak Ridge Estates. My grandfather's windmill, once a point of contention, was now a symbol of resilience and legacy, and Karen, she put her house up for sale and left town in disgrace. When the new board members came to renew the water contract, they didn't argue. They were grateful. And as for Karen, well, she never bothered me again. I stand on my porch sometimes listening to the windmill's familiar creak, the sound of justice, the sound of legacy, the sound of a neighborhood that finally learned what happens when you try to bully the wrong person. So what do you think? How far should a community go to protect itself from the abuses of power? What does it mean when those who are supposed to serve us become the ones we need protection from? Let me know in the comments. And if you've had your own HOA nightmare, share it, because you're not alone.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.